Our next speaker is going to be Tim Guinea. He's an American stage, television, and feature film actor. Been in a lot of films, including Elementary, actually, which I really like that. He's the director of 4 short films and most recently appeared in the 2019 Canadian drama Ash. But I will leave it to you.
Hey, so I'm Tim Guinea. Like Josh, I'm a climate reality leader. I work in former Vice President Al Gore's climate reality project. That's not particularly impressive. There's 23,000 of us around the world. But the climate crisis is hugely important in my life. We have these trainings every, 3 or 4 times a year, or something, 5 times this year. And a couple of years ago, I was supposed to go to one of them, and I went to my doctor the day I was supposed to go, and I was told I had cancer. I had cancer, and I don't mean to make that, ooh, I had cancer. I'm sure there are plenty of people here who have dealt with this thing. But, you know, when you hear that word, the floor kind of pulls out from under you. And I had this real question about whether I'd go to the climate reality training or whether I'd stay home with my wife and the dog, because I didn't know how it was going to go. And the thing that my friend cancer taught me was amazing. I wanted going to the training because I realized I had a tiny window in which to be of service to young people and future generations and the world, which is true of all of us, whether we're cancer or young cancer. We have a little tiny window to be of service. So I'm really glad I'm here. I'm really glad Josh asked me. I'm really glad I'm here for lots of reasons. Actually, last week, Sloan Kettering told me I'm now in survivorship. So, yay science. So we're gathered here at this late hour to consider an extraordinary roadmap to action, one that will lead to economic prosperity and lead to thousands of jobs, and light a torch of possibility and light a beacon for the rest of the nation to follow. And yet the hour is late. We have to realize that we are, as Dr. King said, in the time when tomorrow is today. We know we're at the edge of a precipice, not only because the Amazon is burning, not only because Africa is burning, not only because Australia is burning, not only because Antarctica this week had the highest temperature in recorded history, not only because $40 billion were spent last year on extreme weather disasters around the world. We don't need to go around the world for evidence. There's been a 71% increase in extreme precipitation events in Rhode Island. You see more flooding, especially along the Providence River. More and more days above 90 degrees. Coastal erosion is blooming here. And we know, as Mr. Molina and Mr. Morales and Mr. Vincent mentioned, there is deep, deep injustice. Climate change much more profoundly affects the poor, affects people of color, affects women, affects the LGBTQ community. Mary Robinson, the former president of Ireland, has said that climate change is the greatest threat to human rights in the 21st century, and the hour is late and getting later. And I'm glad Kaylee is here. It's no wonder that many of the young people in the Sunrise Movement are frustrated with the slowness of our ability to act on this crisis, which we are dumping in their laps. For too long, the great litmus test has been whether people believed in the climate crisis. People on one side of the aisle felt better about themselves if they could say, I believe that climate change is real, because the deniers don't believe that it's real. The great Vermont environmentalist Ben Stevenson has written, those who will have the blood on their hands, those who will be judged most culpable by our children and by future generations are not only the denialists and the obstructionists, but the moderates, the cautious pragmatists, the reasonable, serious, centrist voices who fail to acknowledge the true scale, urgency, and gravity of the climate crisis, and so fail to address it in any meaningful way. And I say to you, it is no longer enough simply to believe. We must act. Belief is nothing. And yet, here we are, we're a handful of people facing a really big crisis, facing fossil fuel companies that have enormous amounts of money. Exxon Mobil's net worth is about $350 billion. It's actually dropping. The news came out this week, but that's still an awful lot of money. So, what good does it do for us to be in this room together? The odds aren't good. So does anybody know in 1850 in America where the largest aggregation of capital was?
Providence.
Where?
Providence.
Is it Providence? No. What industry was it in? Not in railroads. What did you say?
Farming.
Not in farming?
Slavery?
Where?
Textiles.
Not in textiles.
Slavery.
Slavery. It was the capital invested in human beings, in human souls. Now, I have to be really careful here, because I'm going to talk about a really specific thing, and I'm not talking about torture, I'm not talking about human misery, I'm not talking about anything like that. I would guess that putting all of that capital in one place made it possible for some people to justify the continuation of that terrible exploitive practice. I would also suggest that terrible amount of wealth, all put together right now by the fossil fuel industry, allows some people to justify the continuation of that industry. So when we think about slavery, when we think about the abolition movement comes out of the plantations, it comes out of England, it also comes out of the Northeast. It comes out of ethical and moral societies, both secular and religious, in the Northeast. All of which to say, when we consider phase 2 of the renewable Rhode Island, it's not just the economy. It's not just jobs that should lead us to action. It's not even our survivability. It is our moral rectitude that must lead us. But in these times, there can be no morality without action. Inaction today is the capitulation of moral integrity. So last week I had the honor to speak before a group of teachers in New York who wanted to ask me, how do you talk to young people about the climate crisis? It's tricky, right? It's a tricky thing. The hard thing, the thing I came up with, you have to be honest. You have to say, you're facing something really hard. What I wanted to be able to say was, this is hard. What you're facing is hard. But you have adult allies. You have people standing next to you, shoulder to shoulder. And I'm doing everything I can to make sure the burden we're placing on you is as light as possible. To my mind, that is the great moral litmus test we all face. Are we being active enough to stand with people like Haley and say that? So, before us, as has been outlined, is a plan of action. Let us rise to action. Let the young people among us find inspiration, not just empty words. It's time for Rhode Island to forge its destiny. I'm sorry I'm using big words. That's what happens when you get cancer. You feel like you can use big words because this life is short and fragile and extraordinary. And this is a moment of extraordinary possibility to rise into being the very best people that we can be. I hope you all grab hold of it. I hope you move forward with this extraordinary plan. Thank you very much.